I arrived 40 minutes early, which tells you everything about how much I wanted this to go well. The venue was one of those converted loft spaces in the Arts District. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs. The kind of place my sister had circled in a magazine 3 years ago and said, "Someday." I was the one who made someday happen. I was the one who called the coordinator, negotiated the deposit, put the balance on my credit card because she said she'd pay me back before the end of the month. That was 11 months ago. I stood near the window and watched the parking lot fill up with cars I recognized. My aunt's silver Camry. My cousin's truck with the dented rear bumper. My mom's boyfriend's Jeep, which meant my mom was here too, which meant everyone had gotten the updated invitation except me. Let me back up. My sister, younger by 4 years, got engaged last spring to a guy she'd been dating for 14 months. I liked him fine. He was quiet, laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. Always brought something when he came to family dinners. The kind of person you don't think about much, which is its own kind of compliment. When she called to tell me about the engagement, I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I stepped into the break room and let her talk, and when she said, "Will you be my maid of honor?" I sat down on the edge of a folding chair and started crying in a way I hadn't cried in years. Good crying. The kind that surprises you. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. What followed was 8 months of my life that I gave to her completely. Not exaggerating. I kept a spreadsheet, vendor contacts, deposit deadlines, and said RSVPs, dietary restrictions. I drove 40 minutes each way to every cake tasting, every florist consultation, every dress fitting. I threw her bridal shower, planned the bachelorette weekend in Savannah. Flights, hotel, restaurant reservations, the whole thing. I covered 2 of her bridesmaids who couldn't afford their share without being asked, and I paid for the venue. $4,200. Because my parents didn't have it, because her future in-laws said they'd contribute, and then quietly didn't, because I had savings, and she was my sister and I loved her, and you do things for people you love without keeping score, or at least, that's what I believed then. The first sign came about 6 weeks before the wedding. I texted to ask about the rehearsal dinner timeline. I needed to coordinate with the restaurant about the private room, and she took 2 days to reply. When she did, it was 3 words: "We'll figure it out." I let it go. She was stressed. Weddings are stressful. I'd read enough planning forums to know that brides sometimes go a little sideways in the final stretch, and the best thing you can do is stay steady. The second sign came 2 weeks later when I found out, not from her, but from my cousin who mentioned it casually over the phone, that they'd added a second photographer. A friend of her fiancé's family. Someone I'd never heard of. Fine. Except the original photographer had been my recommendation. Someone I'd researched for weeks, and she'd said yes to him specifically because I vouched for him. Nobody told me there'd been any change in plans. I mentioned it to her. She said she'd been meaning to tell me. She said it in a way that made it clear she hadn't been. The third sign was the dress. Not the bridesmaid dress, the wedding dress. She'd gone for a second fitting without telling me. We had been to every other fitting together. I found out from our mom, who went with her instead, who said it was spontaneous, last minute, they just happened to be in the area. Our mom, who had not been to a single prior fitting, because she said she trusted my judgment. I sat with all of this. I told myself I was reading too much into things. I made excuses that I was embarrassed about later. I kept showing up, kept answering texts about centerpieces and seating charts, kept being the person who had everything handled. Then, 12 days before the wedding, I got a group text. It was addressed to the bridal party. 6 people. I was not one of them. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time to make sure I wasn't misreading the recipient list. Her college roommate. Her cousin on her dad's side. 3 girls from her friend group I'd met a handful of times. And her fiancé's sister, who'd been added as an honorary bridesmaid 2 months ago. I was not on that list. The text was about the morning of schedule. What time to arrive at the hotel, what to bring, when hair and makeup would start. Logistical things. Things I would have been coordinating if I were still in the role she'd asked me to be in. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time. My cat, Juniper, jumped up next to me and pushed her head against my arm. I scratched behind her ears without thinking about it. She purred loud enough that I could feel it in my palm. I picked up my phone and called my sister. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I texted her, "Hey, I think I was left off the bridal party group text by accident. Can you call me when you get a chance?" She read it. I could see the read receipt. She didn't reply. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, I still hadn't heard from her. I called again. Voicemail again. I texted our mom, who said she was sure it was just a misunderstanding and that my sister had been overwhelmed and I should give her space. Give her space. I was the one holding her wedding together. I was the one who'd paid for the space she was getting married in, and I was being asked to give her space. I went to work. I took my patients through their vitals, charted their medications, sat with a woman in room 7 who was frightened and held her hand and talked to her about her grandchildren until she fell asleep. On my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking garage and didn't eat anything and didn't cry, which felt like an accomplishment. On Friday, 11 days before the wedding, she finally called. I let it ring twice before I answered, which I'm not proud of, but it was the only control I had in that moment. She didn't start with an apology. She started with, "So I've been thinking," which is how people begin sentences when they've already decided something and need you to hear it without any room for negotiation. She said things had shifted. She said the wedding had grown more intimate than she expected, and she'd had to make some hard decisions about the bridal party. She said she hoped I understood. She said she still wanted me there, of course, as asked. She said I was still her sister. I asked her when she'd made this decision. She said a few weeks ago. I asked her why she hadn't told me. She said she didn't know how. I asked her if she'd thought about the fact that I'd been coordinating her wedding for 8 months, that I'd paid for the venue, that I'd covered 2 bridesmaids, that I had thrown her shower and organized her bachelorette and driven 40 minutes each way to every fitting she'd invited me to. She was quiet. Then she said, "I know you did a lot. And I really appreciate it. I appreciate it." Like I'd brought over a casserole. I said, "Okay, just that one word," because I didn't trust myself with more. And then I said I needed to go, and I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time afterward. Juniper settled in my lap, heavier than she looks, and I rested my hand on her back and felt her breathe. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the girl who called me crying from her dorm freshman year, and I drove 2.5 hours each way in January to take her to dinner and a movie and back. I thought about the year she lost her job and stayed on my couch for 6 weeks, and I never once made her feel like a burden. I thought about the dress fitting I'd gone to alone, that first time, before anyone else was involved, when she stood in front of the mirror and her eyes filled up, and she said, "I can't believe this is actually happening." And I stood next to her and meant every word when I said, "You look like yourself." But more so. And I thought about the fact that the wedding she'd dreamed about for years, the one in the converted loft space with the Edison bulbs and the exposed brick, was happening because I made it happen. And I wasn't going to be standing beside her when it did. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I dozed in and out and woke up before it was light, and lay there watching the ceiling. In the morning, I made coffee and sat with Juniper and thought clearly for the first time in weeks. I had options. I could show up to the wedding as a guest, smile, take pictures, pretend. I could not show up at all. I could call my sister back and say everything I hadn't said on the phone. I could talk to my mom, who would tell me to keep the peace, to let it go, to remember what was important. Or I could do the one thing that had been in the back of my mind since I hung up the phone. I could stop. I had set up automatic payments for the venue's remaining balance. There was one installment left, due the following week. $3,800. I had also, because I was thorough and organized, and had been treating this wedding like my own professional responsibility, kept every receipt, every bank transfer, every email confirmation. I had a folder. I had documentation. I sat at my laptop, and I pulled up the payment portal, and then I canceled it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel anything when I did it. I felt sick, briefly, the way you feel when you do something that can't be undone. I also felt, underneath that, something else. Something that took me a second to name: relief. I closed the laptop and went and got ready for work. I also, before I left, drafted an email. Not a long one. About 4 sentences. I sent it to my sister and I CC'd the venue coordinator. because the coordinator had my contact information as the primary account holder, and I wanted there to be no confusion about the situation. The email said, "I'm writing to let you know that I've canceled my remaining payment obligations for the venue. As I'll no longer be participating in a coordinating role for this event, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to continue covering costs. I've attached documentation of what I've contributed to date. I wish you all the best." That's it. That's all it said. I drove to work. I clocked in. I got through my shift. My phone started going off around 11 in the morning. I know this because I checked it during my break, and there were 14 missed calls. A mix of my sister, my mom, and two numbers I didn't recognize that turned out to be her future mother-in-law and the venue coordinator. I didn't listen to the voicemails until I got to my car at the end of my shift. I sat there in the dark of the parking garage and put in my earbuds. My sister's first voicemail was confused, asking what was happening. Her second was upset. Her third, and she'd called me 17 times total by then, was the kind of voice I'd never heard from her, thin and high, saying the venue had contacted them about the outstanding balance, and they didn't have the money, and the wedding was in 11 days, and please call her back. My mom's messages were steadier, but more pointed. "You need to call your sister. This is not the time for this. Whatever is going on between you two, the wedding is not the place. People are counting on this." I sat with all of it. Then I listened to a voicemail from a number I didn't have saved. A woman's voice I'd never heard before, controlled but clearly frightened, saying she understood there had been some miscommunication, and she'd like to discuss options. I put my phone in my bag. I went home. I fed Juniper. I made dinner. Actually made it. Stood at the stove and cooked, which I hadn't done properly in weeks because I'd been too tired and too consumed. I ate at my kitchen table and listened to the rain start outside, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I was inside my own life. My sister showed up at my apartment the next morning. I hadn't told her to come. She rang the buzzer 4 times before I answered it, and when she came upstairs, her eyes were swollen, and her hair wasn't done, and she looked like she hadn't slept either. I let her in because she was my sister. I made her tea because that's what I do. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I don't understand why you did this." I said, "I think you do." She said the wedding couldn't happen without the venue, that they'd been calling around, and nothing else was available. Not on 10 days' notice. Not anything remotely comparable. I said I was sorry to hear that. She said, "How can you do this to me?" And I said, calmly, without raising my voice, because I wasn't angry anymore. I had moved past that. I said, "You removed me from the bridal party 8 months into planning a wedding I was financing and coordinating, and you told me with 11 days to go. And you thought I would just absorb that and keep writing checks." She didn't say anything. I said, "I would have done anything for you. I have done almost everything for you. What I can't do is keep funding something I've been shut out of." Juniper wandered in from the bedroom and sat next to my chair and looked at my sister with the mild disinterest cats, reserved for situations they find beneath them. My sister cried. I had tissues on the table. I'd put them there before I let her up, because I'd known this was coming, and I pushed them toward her, and I didn't say anything while she cried. Eventually she said, "I don't even know when things got like this." I said, "I think it happened slowly and then all at once, the way things usually do." She said she was sorry, more than once. She said she'd made decisions without thinking about how they would land, that she'd gotten swept up, that she'd let other people's opinions affect things they had no right to affect. I didn't ask her to specify. I had a pretty good guess. I said I appreciated her saying so. And then I said, "The money isn't coming back on automatically. But I'm not going to leave you without a venue if you can hear what I'm saying to you and actually mean the apology." She looked at me. I said I need to matter. Not because of the money. Not because I did the work. Just because I'm your sister, and I always have been. She nodded. And then she actually said it, the full version. The one that took something from her to say. Not "I appreciate it." Not "I know you did a lot." She told me she had been wrong. She said she had taken me for granted in a way she was ashamed of. She said she didn't want to get married and look at the photos 20 years from now and know what she'd done. I reinstated the payment that afternoon. The wedding happened. I stood in the bridal party. Reinstated. a conversation that happened between my sister and two of her friends that I was not present for, and which I gathered was not entirely comfortable. I wore the dress. I held her bouquet while she kissed her husband. I danced at the reception until my feet hurt. At one point during the evening, she found me near the edge of the dance floor and grabbed my hand and held it for a second without saying anything. That was enough. I still have the folder. The receipts, the transfers, the email chain. I don't think I'll need it. But I kept it because I have learned. Finally, at 31, later than I should have, that love and documentation are not mutually exclusive. That you can love someone completely and still know exactly what you gave and what it cost. Juniper was asleep on my pillow when I got home. I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my heels and looked at her and thought, this is the truest relationship in this apartment. She opened one eye, decided I was not interesting enough to fully wake up for, and went back to sleep. I put my dress on the chair. I washed my face. I got into bed next to a cat who doesn't care about venues or deposits or bridal parties, who only knows that I'm warm and I'm home and that's enough. And for the first time in 8 months, I slept all the way through the night.